Welcome back to the OC story. This time we're on part 25, and I do genuinely mean it when I say I think we're approaching the end, or at least the end of this story as it exists here on YouTube. So, as most of you will know by now, I am currently in the process of writing this into a book. So I'm turning it into a fully fledged novel. This means I can go into way more detail, cover a lot more ground. And of course, in this series, you guys are voting for what you want to happen at various points, meaning that the story might take a few different twists and turns here, whereas in the novel, I've got a rough idea of how I want it to end now. And while I know roughly where I want the characters to go here on YouTube as well, it is kind of up to you guys what happens and what they do. So some of the decisions might be a little different, and some of the outcomes might be a little different in the novel as well. But then again, who knows? We shall find out. We're going to rejoin the story and the lives of Tinny, Darrow, and Erasmus, and we're going to skip forward a couple of weeks. So they've escaped the palace and they've escaped the capital, they've gone to another town, another city, but things are not going incredibly well. Let's see what's been happening. We pick up the story in a little town several miles away from the capital. They are rapidly running out of money between them. They have sold what they could, but they are down to their last few coins. They've managed to stay in grotty little taverns, keeping out of the way. But of course, even in the back alleys and back streets, they have to be aware of the criminals. Darrow is being hunted by Maximus and various other criminals who want him dead, who blame him for many different things. Tinny is wanted by criminals as well. Now it is known across the country, across the land, that the princess is missing, potentially been kidnapped or taken. All the criminals are looking for her. And of course, Prince Erasmus has been declared responsible for the assassination of his father, the king, and his older brother, now King Frederick, and his middle brother, Sison, have been seeking him for many, many months. He is wanted by the crown, Darrow is wanted by the assassins, and Tinny is sort of wanted by both. There's something else happening which troubles Eri the most of all. Darrow is still running a fever. It's been 2 weeks now and it hasn't let up. He doesn't seem sick in any other way, though he complains his back aches and burns and itches. Whenever Eri checks it out though, there's nothing there. Old scars, and of course the thick, gnarled scars across his shoulders, the ones that look fresher, look pinker, almost red in certain lights, but nothing else. Nothing that ought to be causing him pain. That troubles Eri possibly most of all. Eventually, of course, as it always had to do, their coin runs out. They can't get regular jobs for fear of being recognised. Erasmus's hair is slowly fading back to his natural, vibrant, rich red, the red that everyone's searching for, the red on all the wanted posters, the red that will give him away. He now spends most of his time wearing Darrow's hooded cloak. All in all, their choices are looking slim and grim, and they gather themselves together in a park after they've left the last tavern with the last of their money and sit together on a bench, wondering what to do. Always in the back of Erasmus and Darrow's minds is that promise they made to Tinny's mother, to Cholly the jester as well. They would take care of the girl. They would look after her. They would not let anything happen to her. And dying of thirst and hunger on a windy street was not what they had in mind. They would fix this. They had to. The trouble was, it wouldn't be easy. Tinny suggested that they run far away to a country where no one knew their name. She'd read stories of princesses running to faraway places, seeking adventure. They will be watching all of the borders, Erasmus thinks, scrubbing his chin. Darrow sighs, face in his hands. Yeah, and we can't get out the criminal network ways neither. They'll be looking for me, and then they'll find all of you. Oh, fuck. So, we can't leave the country at all? Not even sneak out? No, Tinny. They would spot us. There will be soldiers and guards, and even the ones not searching for us will ask for our papers, and we have none to give. It was, indeed, starting to look completely hopeless. The dream, the hope, the wish to just get out of Dravdelania, to get to somewhere else. Ideally not Belgoth, but they could start in Belgoth, but just to get away somewhere. Eventually so far that no one knew their names, no one recognised them, somewhere the wanted posters could not travel. But to get there meant getting out. They had had near misses in the past few weeks. Sometimes criminals recognised Darrow on the street, sometimes guards recognised Tinny. And as Erasmus's hair had slowly started fading back to red and they had no more coin for any more dye, Though Darrow said it suited him and he wore the hood, he was once, big time, recognised. A guard sitting outside a tavern had recognised Prince Erasmus, the traitor, treasonous murderer of the king. They had only just escaped his grasp as he chased after them. They did not want to risk that again. Mithalia's warning to her daughter kept spinning round and around in their minds. There is nowhere you could not run. They will not find you. So, Tinny said after several long, quiet moments, we need to go somewhere they can't find us. But we can't get out. So, we'll have to find somewhere in that they can't find us. Another long moment crawled by, but then Darrow sat up, bright blue eyes staring wide at the other two as he said, there is somewhere we could go. Somewhere in Drevdalania, where we could go, we could hide, and no one would find us. We'd have to be so careful, but we could do it. As long as we avoid the mist and don't get too deep, they'd never find us. And time would just keep going on, and then we could come out in a few months, and it could have been years. It's perfect. It's dangerous, but if we're careful, it could work. He looked at Erasmus, who knew what he meant at once. That forest. Darrow, that just might work. They explained it to Tinny in a rush. The forest they had emerged into, the forest that forest had turned into, and the further and deeper they went, the more they had stolen away from the world itself. How, if they went too far, they would be consumed by that mist, taken and dragged towards the lake. But if they avoided that, if they stayed on the outskirts of that middle forest, they could be hidden for days, weeks, months to them, and outside in the world beyond, time would move by, and they would not be part of it. We could come back out in a couple of weeks and see how much time's gone by. We could leave it months, and then it could be years. 2, 3, 4, hell, 10 years could have passed. But it's dangerous, right? Plenty of people go through there all the time. You just got to have your wits about you and be careful. What do you think, Tinny? Yes, Tinny. Erasmus turned to her, offering his hand, which she took. Darrow and I have been there before. This is brand new to you. I would not wish to take you somewhere you are not willing to go. It is a risk. It is dangerous, but if we are careful, I believe we can navigate it. But if you do not wish to go there, if you do not feel safe, we will not go. So, what do you say? The girl thought for a moment, swinging her ballet-slippered feet back and forth on the bench. I think we should go, she said at last. If nothing else, I don't think we have any other choices. But also, it would be quite nice to be away from the world for a while. Safe and also just quiet, maybe peaceful. I think I'd like to live for a little while with no other people. No one looking for me, no one looking at me, just us for a while. Can we do that? The others nodded. Could we build tree houses? Darrow groaned but smiled. Erasmus chuckled. Yes, Tinny, we can build a tree house. In fact, it might be safer. We could build a tree house and live completely off the forest floor. Can we build rope bridges between them and a big swing and a slide? I really want to see Darrow on a slide. Darrow palmed his face with his whole hand, but he was still grinning. Well then, Erasmus stood up, turning to offer both of his hands now. We have nothing to lose. We have no coin, so we may as well set off now. Are we all ready? They were, in fact, ready. They had all of their belongings stashed about their person and in rucksacks on their backs. Darrow stood up and accepted Erasmus's hand, but Tinny stood up and smacked them both out of the way, taking instead both of their hands, one each in hers, so she could walk in between them. All right, let's go. Let's go and live in the forest. She was smiling so brightly that the other two couldn't help smiling as well, and so they set off, and they went to the forest. Tinny was a little sad for her mother and for Cholly the jester. They would never hear news of her, never hear word, never know what had happened. But she hoped no news would be good news to them. If she was never caught and never captured and never brought back, they would at least know she was safe. It took them another month and a half to reach the forest and to travel deep enough where they would be safe, where they could feel the pulls and stretches of magic surrounding the trees. They were deep enough that they were entrenched in that magic. Time was moving as it pleased, and outside the world was turning without them. They built a small camp and set about searching for the perfect place. Eventually they found it, a sheltered section under the tallest of trees, surrounded by empty stretches of forest floor where they could dig and build, and where they could plant things. It had sturdy trees they could cut down the branches of and build high up in the boughs, and it was close to a stream for fresh running water. And so, for a year, one whole year, they set about building their new home. They did as Tinny had asked and built tree houses. It actually felt fitting somehow, surrounded by this magical place, but also there were wild beasts. They had to be careful. Camping on the forest floor felt, in a way, foolhardy. As soon as they had started building up in the trees, they knew at once that was where they wanted to be. They built platforms which turned into 2 bedrooms, Tinny having one to herself. They built wooden rope bridges connecting the 2. They built other areas where they could sit and stand and watch the views. They built a place for cooking. They built stores for food, places to hang fish, places to hang hunted meat. They built storage, and most importantly, they built a home. Darrow still burned, and he still ached, but nothing seemed to be getting any worse, so he just learned to live with it. The others kept asking, Erasmus in particular, always caring for him, but nothing was getting worse, so they all accepted it. Darrow saying it would have to go away eventually. Maybe it was worry, maybe it was stress, maybe it was any number of things. And as they settled into their little forest life and their home slowly grew and took shape, when the roofs were on and the beds were made and their stores were full of food and berries and they had set about a little routine, things were just easier, happier, and even things that hurt and burned and how his back ached, it didn't occur to Darrow to care because everything else was so lovely. They truly did have a little routine between them. Darrow usually chopped the wood and went out hunting, but he taught the others how to do it as well, and they would happily join him sometimes. They all often would sit on the bank of the river and fish. Tinny and Erasmus enjoyed experimenting with flavours and food. They did the majority of the cooking, mostly because when Darrow tried, things tended to go horribly, horribly wrong, but he was always very apologetic and eager to learn more, and very eager to taste what they had been concocting. They scouted far and wide, finding various different fruits and vegetables they could plant, bringing seeds and other things back to dig into the dirt and plant and water and keep an eye on. They even got tomatoes growing on vines, and they stuck twigs down into the earth so that the vines could twirl around them, growing straight up and up into the air. Darrow would often contemplate things, sitting and just watching the other 2 as they laughed, cooking together, tasting flavours, offering things to him. And he found himself wondering, despite the strangeness of the situation and how simple it was, he still wondered how on earth he'd got so very lucky. As the months rolled on, Darrow helped Tinny to build a swing. He hung it underneath her bedroom so she could swing there back and forth, watching the view of the flower beds. Sometimes, when they went scavenging and exploring, they would bump into roaming groups of adventurers or travellers. They would exchange fun and games and stories, and sometimes they would hear tales of the outside world, slowly piecing together a picture of how much time had passed. By the time they'd been in the forest for a year, nearly 2 had passed in the outside world. But still, they didn't talk about going back. The idea seemed just flitted to the back of their minds, and they were all enjoying their solitude. Then, as they crept steadily towards their 2nd year, Darrow started to get worse. He burned even hotter. His back ached and burned. Those gnarled scars on the top of his shoulders were bright, flaming red. And his eyes started to fog in and out of focus. For a while he was concerned the mist had crept in upon them, but the other two could not see it. The blue of his eyes was as bright and clear as ever, but Darrow could not see as well. Visions were crowding into his mind so much that he could not shake them off. From there, it kept getting worse. Eventually, Darrow could no longer make out the people in front of him, could no longer see Erasmus's hands as he waved them before his eyes, could no longer see Tinny's face as she looked scared up at him. He could hear their voices, though. He could smell the campfire, smell the dinner they were cooking. He just couldn't see it. Everything before him was a rush of memory, of unfamiliar things that felt so familiar, but he could swear he'd never seen, never done before. He could see glades, he could see starry skies, he could feel hurt and pain, and then he was back in his childhood, and he could see as he ran down a street. He could see hopping into a cart. He saw the carriage where he had first met Erasmus, saw those beautiful dark eyes, saw that dark alley where they had met first so many years before. Everything came back in a swirl and a rush, nonsensical, spilling under and over each other, and he could no longer see the real world in front of him. All he could do was cling on to their hands as they helped him to walk, steadying him as he rose from his bed, got down the stairs and out towards the fire to sit and keep warm around it. They helped him to eat his food, helped him to drink, and they took over the hunting and the fishing. Darrow hated it. He felt useless and helpless, and he didn't understand. None of them understood. And through all of it, that voice came back, dragging and gnarling at the back of his head, calling in a voice so familiar that he was certain he'd never heard it before. Castellane. Eri. Darrow was holding on to Erasmus tight one night. The world was dark around them and peaceful, but Darrow was shivering, burning hot in the prince's grip. Yes, Darrow? Are you all right? Eri? I'm scared. Erasmus didn't know what to say to that. He'd seen the assassin scared, seen him frightened, seen him hurt beyond measure before, but this, he couldn't help. He could do nothing. Nothing but hold the man he cared for so much, kiss his forehead and promise him it would all be all right, even though how could he believe the words he was saying? There was nothing he could do. There was no cause of the hurt, no horrible man in a deep, dark dungeon that he could stab and make him stop. There was nothing. Nothing they could possibly understand. Just Darrow, hurt in his arms and afraid. The next morning, they were all awoken by a loud burst of bright, brilliant light. Erasmus ran to the window and peered out, Tinny's face appearing at her own bedroom window as they stared down towards their fire. Engulfed down below was this bright, vibrant light. Erasmus helped Darrow to hobble out onto the rope bridge, and they all stared down as the light slowly faded and subsided. And at its centre, they could make out a figure glowing and emanating a brilliant, bright, golden light, with long, flowing hair and wings billowing out either side of him. He looked up at the little group, and in a voice only Darrow recognised, said, "My son, I have finally found you." And that is the end of this part for now. A quick thing for you guys to vote on or suggest on down in the comments below is, should Darrow's father be good, bad, or somewhere in between? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And as always, thank you so much for engaging with this chaotic story, and I meant what I said. We will definitely be done by episode 30. This story is certainly wrapping up, so I will see you next time, and thank you for listening. Alright, bye bye.